All right. All right. Welcome to the January 6th, 2025 edition of the Cluster API AWS Info Provider Office Hours. Um, Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome first meeting of 2025. Uh, we are Kubernetes 6 project. We abide by the CNCF code of conduct, so be welcoming and be excellent to one another. Um, If there's anybody new on the call and you'd like to just introduce yourself, I'm going to mute myself and yeah, just go ahead and introduce yourself if you'd like. Okay. I think there was someone else that was that had joined the call, but I think had audio issues, so maybe they'll come back. We'll give them a chance. Okay, so let's start off. We don't have any PSAs. Think for action items, we don't have any specific ones. I know that um, some of us have been looking at the CI issues. I think that's sort of top of mind as far as the agenda goes. So should we just jump straight to that, Nolan?
Yeah, that works for me.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so there's two major ongoing CI failures. One, I believe, is intermittent. No, sorry. So the first is EKS. That I think we talked in early December about this. Richard, I don't think you were there, but summary of it is that um, the EKS tests try to spin up a control plane only and then install core DNS. Um, I'm not sure why that ever worked because users can't install anything to EKS, but it seems like maybe we were relying on a poor behavior from EKS. Uh, but this test is failing now, so I think the work here for this one is either completely disable the test or rewrite it such that it doesn't try to install core DNS and just spins up a control plane, make sure that's good. So that's the EKS one, and I think that one's a little bit more straightforward. The other one is the CAPI pivot test, always failing. So this one is coming from an upstream CAPI test. It is not part of our test suite, but I think it's one that we have to conform with in order to make Cluster API happy. Looking at it, and in some of the comments I've made on it, the biggest thing I can see is that there's a CAPI or a kappa-e2e image that is built locally in the cluster and then kind of sent out to all of the worker nodes or the control plane nodes. Um, that works for almost all the tests except for this one. Sometimes one of the masters doesn't get the image, and everything I can find shows that it should be getting it. The cloud init commands that are there for I believe it's not controller runtime, container runtime, or what is it? I'm blanking. 2 weeks off has made me forget. Could you scroll down a little bit, Daniel? Yeah, QB that there it is, CTR. So we have some commands that are supposed to be fetching and tagging the image. Uh, but that just never seems to happen. And no node logs are gathered from the test. I'm not sure if that's so we do have logic in place in the tests to grab that. But I'm wondering if that is not working in our case because it is a CAPI test, not a kappa test. Um, but I'm kind of reached the limit of my knowledge. My next step was going to be firing up this locally and seeing what I can if I can SSH into a node or something while it's having problems. Um, but this is failing on basically everything. Uh, and I kind of think it's we don't have valid CI signal on this one until we get it passing. And I think this might be a release blocker, possibly even a merge blocker for things that use these code paths. So yeah, I'm open to suggestions, thoughts from folks. Maybe this I put in here also that maybe this was related to uh our cloud init issue that Daniel had been working on. But it's possible it's not because other tests are passing. So there's spiel. Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for looking into both of these. Yeah, the descriptions are very thorough. Uh, have did you by any chance ask Cluster API if any other info providers have had any issues with this particular pivot test?
So I did some digging on my own. I didn't see any other providers having an issue with it.
Okay.
There were some core CI failures that I thought were related, and
Hmm.
I did some uh um version bumps, but they did not seem to take care of it. So there was some flaking CI
Okay.
in the 1.8 time frame. There were some 1.8 patch releases that we didn't have. I included those. That PR had the same issue.
Okay. Thanks. Richard?
Yeah, I was going to say it's sorry, my headphones are weird. Yeah, it's interesting. It's only this one, isn't it? And the pre-cube ADM commands. I was like, well, it can't really be that because we use those in other tests, but we don't really, do we? We'd use obviously what kubeadm generates. I don't think we necessarily use the pre-cube ADM side of things. Would be interesting just to add in. We could add temporary test, can we? Just to one of the other ones, maybe. If we run it locally and add I don't know, just create a file locally with just the pre-QADM commands, just to see if it is something like that, just to rule that one out.
Okay, yeah, I could try that. I will note that this does run on all but one node every time. So yeah, it run this runs in other tests because this is how they get the image that we build. Basically, we build the ETE image. It took me forever to find this because it's not pushed to any permanent repository. Basically, we build it, we push it up to a public.ecr.aws um, tag, and then you'll see the second command where we tag it locally. If you look at the end, we call it this GCRIO Kate's staging cluster API. But this is always built locally in the cluster, pushed up to ECR, and then all of the machines download that. The reason I was wondering about Cloud init and these pre-cube ADM config flags is only one node has this issue, but it's the node that has the controllers that we need. So it's got the Kappa manager. I think it's got some of the Cappy node management stuff. So yeah, I would think it's not kubeadm. Other nodes get it. For some reason, one instance isn't getting the image, and I think that might be blocking us. But I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
when you say one image, sorry, one node is not getting it, so the other control plane nodes are getting it. It's just
Yes.
that one. So it's not as if it's difference between workers and control planes, is it? It's just that's so random.
Yeah,
Well, it appears so random.
yeah, and I'm kind of stymied by the lack of machine console logs for this uh problem, but in digging around, I was gonna pull in some logic to gather those, but in digging around, we have them for all other test cases. Um, this one never grabs any console logs. There, if you go look at the job in the artifacts directory, it'll be empty. Um, so yeah, if we can look at one, go to artifacts, clusters, I believe, and then self-hosted, and then you can check logs first. Yep. So there's cluster control move when it's doing the pivot itself. If you go into there, it looks like it's, oh yeah, it gets connection refused. If you go back up, and then go, I think one more level up, resources, and then self-hosted, um, yeah, back one. Self-hosted RJ. This is one of the pivoted ones. This is everything we have. As far as I know, we should have cluster logs in here. Um, it's been 2 weeks, so forgive me if I've forgot the structure. But if you look at, trying to remember where, I think the AWS machine, or is it the node that has the list of images? One of these will not have the kappa dash manager colon ETE.
List of images. I don't. I wouldn't
Yeah.
see that on the status of any of these.
Hang on. Okay, here. Yeah, I found it. Um, it's actually linked on the issue description.
Oh, okay.
If you scroll down, I should have a little bit more associated node. Here we go. So this
Oh,
has a list of images that the node itself knows about,
okay.
but you'll notice if you search for kappa dash manager, it shouldn't be in here.
I see.
So the pod does get scheduled to this node, but then it will fail because it doesn't have the image for some reason.
Okay.
So yeah, I think if no one else has any ideas, I think the next step's going to be run this locally and try to log into the node if you can,
Hmm.
because I don't know why. I also had some notes on there about where the log dump commands happen,
Hmm.
and they seem to be running because they rely on some other parts of the test setup to have not failed, have not errored. Um, so yeah, uh, I'm kind of at a loss there without digging in more. If anybody has any suggestions for how to get to this a little bit quicker, I am all ears.
Yeah, I think sadly when it comes down to things like this, it's just the painful way of running it locally and rerunning it locally, and it just takes
Okay.
forever. But yeah, whenever I've had issues, it's doing that really. I
Okay.
also wonder if we could maybe also update the test. So we have the pre-cube ADM commands to do the image pull, Wonder if we could also add something quickly on the post kubeadm commands just to do a validation that those images are
Are there?
are there. But
Possibly.
that'd be run after the bootstrapping of the node, but it could still fail, and it could still fail if the image wasn't there.
That's true. We might hit a failure before we even get to that point.
Yeah. It's very strange as well. What I also don't get is why all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but however many weeks ago, this just started failing after years of
Being
it just,
fine.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and unfortunately, looking back through the periodics, I couldn't find like when it started. I was trying to kind of do a manual bisection. It looks like whenever it started, that has been cleared out of the history of periodics. Um, I suppose I could try to go back through pull requests and see where it first started cropping up. Um, but one of the other things that I have a PR up for, which is unrelated to these two failures, is I think, especially during periodics, we had some failures where um, the CloudFormation bootstrapping got wedged because different tests were creating the service count user um, and failing because one CloudFormation wants to make the user, it already exists, therefore it fails the CloudFormation test and it tries to make it again. And I have a fix for that, but that adds a bunch of noise to the failures as well. Um, so yeah.
Is it true that at this point we don't even know because we don't have the logs, we don't even know what the sort of the result of these commands is?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. The the status of the node not having the image listed on it tells me they failed, but we don't know how or why. And I don't think now I if I look for this, I don't remember. I don't think we even have the ECR tag listed
Mm,
in that node. So it's not like the pull succeeded, but the tag failed.
okay.
It's like we don't pull it at all for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've run ETE or the yeah, I guess yeah, or ETE tests in my own account, but it sounds like that's what we need to do. So I can try doing that.
Okay, cool. I will also be taking a look at that. I was discussing internally with our team. This is going to for us, it's going to affect some end users and how we can have timeliness on delivering things. And I just don't feel comfortable like reviewing most other stuff with this constantly failing.
Richard, is it fair to say that if we run this locally, we can, is there something that we need to, is there an option that we need to set it to prevent the cleanup?
Yeah, there is. There's a couple of flags on the tests. I can share those. So one is whether you want the cleanup of the cloud formation. If you're running locally, you don't want it to necessarily create the cloud formation every time because that really slows things down. So there's a couple of flags there that you can set and unset as you wish, just to speed things up. But then the artifacts folder that should persist. You can override the location of that as well, just in case you want to. But that should persist anyway.
What about the machine? Is it possible to prevent the cleanup of the cluster? at the?
There's a couple of flags, but I don't know if they prevent cleanup completely. The way I normally get around that is when I run it locally, I increase the timeout, the Ginkgo timeout to like 4 hours, just so, and then I set breakpoints, especially on the teardown or the after sweep, just so in case I miss anything, then it just stops there. Then I can just go and have a look at the various clusters before it's cleaned up. Maybe we should capture that actually in a markdown doc.
Yeah, we do have a doc describing some of what you talked about for like making the cloud formation prior, having your management cluster prior. But we don't have anything talking about Ginkgo timeouts and things like that. So that would be helpful. Um, I know some of this, some of our test uh, work comes from upstream core CAPI test framework. But some of this would be useful just for newer contributors, even myself, to figure out how the Ginkgo framework works.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's probably a good time to also review I guess, all the logs and everything that we are capturing in the end-to-end tests. Because yeah, we could definitely do better probably in some of the cases.
Would there be a cook? Well, yeah, we could maybe take this offline, but perhaps we could find a time where we can pair or huddle. Um, that might make for
Sounds good.
faster progress. Okay. Do you also want to look at the other issue in detail, Nolan?
I think we can uh, do that one asynchronously. Richard, I would like your input on there, though. I'm very unfamiliar with EKS, um, but uh, yeah,
Cool.
I think my conclusion of we just need to rewrite the test or disable it, I think is the right one. But uh, having someone else look at that to double check me would be awesome.
Yeah, I'll take a look.
Cool, thank you.
Okay. Next topic.
Yeah, this is a one that we're seeing with GCP as well, but something to note, something that Richard noted several years ago was that there is a version 2 of the AWS SDK for Go. And I noted in a comment on here that July 31st of this year is when they will officially stop pushing anything for updates. So, um, just highlighting that this will probably be something someone will need to grab this year. I pinged both people who said they were interested uh, again to see if they want to pick it up. If not, we may be bringing people from our team to work on this.
I'd be glad to. I perhaps could get it.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I'll also mention someone on our team. I need to dig some more to get the details of this, but there's apparently some movement in, I think, in the cloud provider SIG, especially from GCP and AWS to make a service object operator. Um, so the idea is to represent their cloud, the cloud SDK or the cloud API, sorry, cloud API as all of that as Kubernetes objects within the cluster. Um, and then that is how you would interact with it. So you wouldn't necessarily call the Go SDK directly. Azure and CapZ have a implementation of this uh, in progress. There's the Azure Service Operator, which exposes this, and CapZ uses that for some things. But I think for AWS and GCP, this is very early days. I'm just mentioning it so we can maybe have an eye on it.
Cool. Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, yeah. I'll one of my teammates is a SIG chair on SIG Cloud Provider. I'll ask if he can get some details and maybe we can throw that in a ticket. I think that's less urgent than getting V2.
Yeah, on that, this has been around for quite some time. AWS joined the meeting probably a couple of years ago, and said, yeah, we should adopt ACK. This is the way forwards. And actually, when we looked at ACK, not all the services are included, or they weren't included at that time. So it just wasn't possible. Then we had people from Crossplane coming in and saying, "Hey, yeah, it's a Crossplane because then you don't have to worry about the individual." And so, yeah, I guess the big caveat with that is that there has to be the coverage of the services,
Yep.
which at the time ACK wasn't. And I suspect probably still doesn't cover everything that we need, but I could be wrong. They might have really accelerated it.
Yeah, and this could also be very early days. I think I don't know what shape it's going to take. It may be a somewhat generic uh Kubernetes API, so you can say, give me a machine, but obviously there's going to be differences in services offered. Um, and yeah, now that you mentioned ACK, I remember that was an effort. I know Crossplane tries to do some sort of stuff for their customers. Um, the Azure one has gone through multiple iterations now. The current version of Azure, the Azure Service Operator uses um, the names I'm forgetting the name now, but the REST API spec basically to generate matching CRDs, and the resulting file is massive. So what CapZ does is they trim out everything they don't need and only try to install those. But we've had some issues running that, so we need to work with the CapZ team to get that working. But I do know CapZ itself isn't even using ASO for like the self-managed case. It works for the AKS versions, but the directly CAPI self-managed stuff is all still Go SDK calls.
Yeah, it's one of my biggest gripes with it. Then you end up with this split thing, which is it's not good for anyone. And yeah, sometimes I wonder what's the benefit to us straight away. You know, it's going to be a lot of work for us and a lot of stability issues. Another dependency. How do we make sure we deploy? You know, it's so many questions with that. Whereas at the moment, we just own everything within our provider. You know, we're not dependent on anyone. So it'd have to be a really, really very good reason to move, which I don't necessarily see at the moment, but could be wrong.
Okay. Yeah. And like I said, I think this isn't anywhere near fully formed. Um, so that's well taken. Like, I don't think AWS is going to drop support for the V2 Go SDK anytime soon. Even if this Kubernetes object manager comes to fruition. So yeah, that's well taken. And I think we've probably diverged. I sent us on a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but um, yeah. Point being, someone will need to take a look at doing this upgrade, even if it's piecemeal, throughout 2025. Julio, thank you for volunteering. If I think some of the folks that volunteered, at least one might be on. I don't know if they're directly on your team at Red Hat, but there's some Hypershift folks. Right, Julio, are you on the ACM team?
No, my
Okay.
team is called Splat.
Oh, you're on Splat. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, okay, cool. So yeah, just I guess for the record, Red Hat is taking a very big interest in Cafe in general. So um,
Yeah, totally.
Okay, thanks. Next topic.
Yeah, it's me and my colleague Milan. So last meeting we discussed the starting working on the issue for having feature gates for AWS cluster and AWS machine. So we did a bit of investigation in the EKS feature. So we have a couple of questions. So the EKS using a machine pool feature gate, similar to the machine pool also feature gate that is used by AWS cluster. So we're just wondering, should we kind of separate the EKS machine pool feature gate from the machine pool feature gate for AWS clusters? That might be like I'm not sure why it's been like why EKS does not have its own feature gate for machine pool. Like, is that a reason for that, or one EKS expert here? I can't tell.
That's historical. We originally had a feature gate for EKS because that was experimental, and then there was some logic that was if EKS is feature gate is enabled and if machine pool is enabled, then enable the AWS managed machine pool controllers. Then AWS, sorry, EKS was graduated to GA, and the reason we kept all of the other ones under, so which means it was enabled by default. So the reason why the machine pool stuff in Kappa is still behind a single feature gate is because machine pools is still experimental in Cappy. Yeah. So it was just a broad enable or disable, depending on whether you want to use machine pools.
Okay. So, like, is the plan to have another one for EKS in the future?
I don't think so. I think it was really driven by the fact that is EKS enabled or not. There's a lot of questions in there around machine pools just generally anyway, whether that's a future thing in Cappy.
Okay. Well, we can keep it as it is. It's just wondering question. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Nolan, if you have.
Yeah, so this stems from us wanting to use Cappy to manage Rosa, which is the Red Hat managed service on AWS. A question for you, Mohammed, is that tied to the machine pool implementation, or is there a way to do that with machine deployment?
Oh, it has nothing to do with Rosa. Rosa handles its machine pool implementation with under the Rosa feature gate. So we are not
Okay.
related. It's just as we planning to have a feature gate for AWS cluster and AWS machine. So I was just checking if the other feature will get affected if we disable those. So machine pool come to mind as it might be get affected, but if it's enabled with EKS and the AWS cluster and AWS machine is gets disabled, it should be working as well. But I was just wondering if that for a reason for that or something else we should consider.
Okay.
So it should be okay. I have another suggest is now or is it good to have a two feature gate, one for AWS cluster and one for AWS machine? And the reason for that, is there a use case that the user can use AWS cluster with AWS machine pool without using AWS machine? Is this a valid use case?
Yeah, technically it's possible. So you could, yeah, you can do. Yeah,
Okay,
you
so
could create.
then, yeah, so it's better then to have two feature gates added, one for AWS cluster, one for AWS machine. But we need to be sure that the AWS machine is not enabled while the AWS cluster is disabled. Because that could be fair, suggest to propose.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like how far do you go down this route with all the features enabling, disabling, when really for Rosa, you really just want a complete subset, don't you? Where I'm sort of thinking, well, actually, is that a separate, complete separate binary that's packaged completely separate? So then it takes a lot of that complexity away, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, okay then. So we are working on the proposal. We're gonna make it available maybe end of this week. So everybody should be able to review it, and then we can take it from there in the next meeting. Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, I have one last thing is I have two PRs for the Rosa work. I need just if you guys can kind of make a review, give it legitimate, will be appreciated. Yeah.
I'll quickly jump in and note one of those is adding tests for Rosa, which is super appreciated.
Cool, thanks.
So yeah, Mohammed, do you want to look at these two as well? That need the LGTMs.
Well, I'm just mentioning them. That's fine.
Oh, sorry. I was updating the docs.
That's okay.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, we have an action item to create a new meeting doc. Richard, you have permission for that? Or I guess you'll.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And then, yeah, I guess we'll need to update the link as well.
Yeah, that's just a pull request to the repo after
Yeah.
that, after the doc's created.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Julia?
Yeah, so I'll be taking the time to review the getting started doc, try to make it more reliable and straightforward. Doesn't work so well for me. I'm not sure why. Try to troubleshoot it as well and make it better for the next person. So if there's anything in the getting started guide or in any part of the docs that anybody wants to see improved, I'd be glad to work on that while I'm at it. So that's the first item. The second, I'd like to check if we want configuration for cloud development environments. So I've been using code spaces a lot myself, but recently I've been using DevBox, and we also have dev files that we support. So if this is something we want, I could do it and send a PR, but just would like to check if it's desirable at all, not to waste that effort. And that's the easy one. The hard one is in which element should we add that dedicated hosts configuration, and that's not necessarily for today, but if anybody have an opinion on that, that would be very helpful because that's the big stuff on my plate. Yeah.
Okay. Richard?
Yeah, just on the first 2 points, on the getting started guide, we've talked previously about having our own version of the getting started guide, because at the moment we just piggyback on the CAPI one, don't we? And that's tries to be everything to every provider, whereas
Yeah.
we have talked in previous office hours about just having one that is very specific just to Kappa,
And
which could be good.
did you get a result out of that? Like what was the
No,
were you
no,
against or were you for or against it? I didn't get the
we didn't get a consensus, but the more I think about it, the more I think actually on our own site it would make more sense to have something that is very specific just to Kappa, and then people don't have to play with the tabs and stuff. So I would be definitely for our own version of it.
Yeah, especially because some tabs don't have like AWS or they're like others. So if you're
Yeah.
AWS, you're kind of others. And the thing, the Kubernetes versioning also is a bit confusing, and I don't know. I couldn't make it work. I tried it a few times, and I'm still not sure where am I failing. Yeah, Daniel.
So I was just still updating the doc. Yeah, no, these are so thank you for for looking at the getting started.
No
Um,
worries.
when I think it would also be great to share. Yeah, so you know, if you end up updating the doc, I think it would be great to share in the cluster API meeting, even if
Mhm.
even if the update is, you know, to make it more just AWS specific. So anyway, so tell the rest of the community about that. Um, and then yeah, there's as far as the you know DevBox code spaces dev file, yeah, there's I think yeah, anything that makes
Mm.
building contributing easier, running tests, that's
Yeah,
all welcome. We could probably start a maybe either a Slack thread or a doc to kind of figure out what would work. I know that you know there are some additional requirements. I think right for DevBox you need Nix, I think, and so yeah, there's some you know there's some requirements for you know for your
yeah.
local machine that we need to keep in mind. But yeah, that would be a really good conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd start with code spaces, and that's pretty much the idea. Just have a code spaces with kind and everything already there to so you can just run your build. And, yeah, and that's why I think this makes sense, right? With the, but again, I'm not sure that would it be okay to just push the code spaces configuration to the repo or the dev box configuration to the repo as PRs? Or do we have like a problem? Would that be against any kind of policy because code spaces is a product of GitHub and Microsoft or don't know what?
Um, yeah, I guess I'm in favor of having like the dev box or the Codespaces configuration files there. I guess where I wouldn't be good is if we had the envarc file. If you're using DevBox to automatically create the environment, that should be, I guess, up to the choice of the user. Maybe we could have a sample envarc to say, hey, if you're using DevBox, do that. I guess the other thing is with DevBox, you can also use it with the dev container, can't you? You can make sure that DevBox is available within the dev container, which we
Yeah.
have a separate dev container config at the moment. So that would be another question, which is whether we want to use it in there as well. But yeah, I'm in favor of all these, uh, especially having the
Got it.
configurations there that just help with just setting things up. But the I'd love to get that the dev container properly set up so it also pulls down CAPI in a relative the CAPI, claims CAPI as well, so that you could actually just do a tilt up from within the dev container as well. That would be super useful.
Okay.
Nolan?
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in and say we mentioned updating the debugging guide and setting up ETEs and stuff. So having stuff like this, like Tilt's been great for testing stuff. I probably still even use that for testing some of the E2E. Um, but yeah, if we have one of these, and I have no opinion one way or the other, one of these would probably help a, a lot with debugging those.
I think the order is code spaces, dev box, and dev files if we are into consider what people would use. I think most people would want code spaces because that's already on GitHub. They can just click on the link on the repo and get stuff up and running, which would be a nice experience to have. Like click a link and run a script and see the thing working on your AWS account would be nice. And DevBox is nice because then it's not just tied to GitHub and works everywhere, including anybody's machine. And that file is because it's what we support, so it kind of drink our own champagne there. So I think all three kind of make sense, but I would certainly start with code spaces.
Okay.
But yeah,
I think, yeah.
good.
What about the dedicated host config? Is that something that we can come
Yeah,
back to?
that's the hard one. Yeah, if in which element should we add that? Because I was thinking on the machine template, but perhaps on the cluster. So if anybody have opinions on that. Because the idea, again, just to, someone bought or won from Microsoft. I don't know. I'll be just an example. Please never mind me using the provider's names, but someone bought SQL Server, two licenses bound to two CPU cores, and they need to run that on a machine that they know that is in that specific machine. Or whatever is the customer use case. We have a few customers asking for this, and it's a general AWS feature, so I think it's nice for us to support it. But again, the idea is that the person can say, I want this machine to run on this specific host ID, and then it's a certain that that instance runs on that metal. And the affinity configuration just says that if that machine reboots, should it reboot on the exact same host ID, or can it reboot on another host ID that you have on your account, perhaps? So that's basically and those are just passed through the run instances call on the placement argument. So it's very similar to another thing we have on EC2 called dedicated instances. So it's similar, but not quite the same, because on dedicated instances, they guarantee that you don't have neighbors from other accounts, but you don't have that specific assignment that control on where it runs. So that's the thing. I think the user will be wanting to say, this machine, here is my spec, and here is the host IDs and affinity that I want for this specific database node, for example.
I don't know. I like your suggestion in the chat.
Oh yeah, I guess yeah. Because when you AWS machine spec, I think, because I'm trying to recall if the whole AWS machine is embedded in the template. I don't think it is, right? It's just the AWS machine spec, and then anything that's under there would end up in both AWS machine, I suppose, if you're creating them by hand, or if you're using the template. I think it still makes sense to have, right, a template. You may have more than one VM for a specific dedicated host, right? So you may end up using the template with a I guess a machine deployment.
Okay. See. Cool. I'll try that then, and let's see where it lands.
Nolan, did you have something or no?
Oh, I was gonna ask a question about that, but I can bring that to the
Oh, no
uh
worries. Come on.
no, so if it's on the AWS machine template, would we specify any valid host of these dedicated hosts? So you would say like, hey, I want to spin up a cluster that might have VMs. They can they can be spun up on machine physical machine 1, 2, or 3. Would you specify all of those? Would you That might make it
Yeah.
tricky.
Yeah, that's where things get a bit weird. Like when you think about machine pools and multiple dedicated hosts, it's a bit hard to think what people would want to do. But the actual use case is proprietary software licensed by CPU socket. That's the like number one use case for like I most and some very uh, small percentage for security policies like compliance, like they have really strict compliance, usually corporate compliance, and some very even fewer cases for performance variability because then you don't have neighbors, you know what's running on that machine, you know you don't have context switching and blah blah blah, and then you have up to 20% more predictable performance, I think, in those instances.
So
Yeah,
oh yeah, I have a response to Nolan's question. I think that so if we support, for example, right, a list, or if the user can specify a list of these machines and then put that on an AWS machine spec or an AWS machine template, then it will be up to Kappa to sort of decide, right? Because I think the actual API call, right? You have to tell
yeah.
AWS here's the dedicated host, right? So if there's
Yeah,
a list, and Kappa is the one that has to decide which of the dedicated hosts to choose. I don't think that's Kappa's business at all.
yeah, because then
So
it would need a kind of a policy configuration. It's like
right.
first one, least used, whatever. How do you
So
want it?
I would I would ask to put that responsibility onto the user, and then if you do need more than one AWS machine on a specific dedicated host, then you have the ability to create a machine deployment with the template that is targeting that dedicated host. If you have multiple dedicated hosts that you need to use, you can create machine deployments, right, that are specifically targeting that host. So that's more work for the user, but then again, that's more control for the user, and then that doesn't put Kappa in this, in this place where
I
Kappa
agree.
is not really the expert, and yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks. That helps a lot. It was exactly my thinking. Like, if I add this as a list of IDs and affinities, then keeping like track and selection and policy and allocation, this will be. So I'll start with a simple one-off parameter. I even already have this code and see where it lands and perhaps try to get a couple customers to try it. Yeah.
Cool. And yeah, agreed.
Another thing in the future, sorry, just to mention, once that is done, the next step that might be good for the customer is to auto allocate the host IDs. So the person could just set that they want host IDs, not use one that they previously allocated. But again, that's next steps. Cool. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, and we are at the end of the meeting. So yeah, thank you very much. This is very productive. I think maybe we have a follow-up thread on the various DevBox code spaces, or just look for those PRs and then try those configurations out. And then I think we'll also follow up on the E2E investigation, see if we can maybe find some time to pair, or at least just continue
Cool.
the conversation. So thanks everybody. Have
See
a
you all.
great
Have a great year.
Thanks. See you, folks.